Alexander Kane had everything a 32-year-old man could want. As the CEO of Kane Industries, one of the most successful tech companies in Silicon Valley, he commanded respect, wielded power, and possessed wealth that most could only dream of. His penthouse apartment overlooked the city, his garage housed a collection of luxury cars, and his bank account had more zeros than he cared to count. Yet as he stood in his corner office on the 40th floor, staring out at the bustling city below, Alexander felt an emptiness that no amount of success could fill. The idea came to him during a particularly frustrating board meeting. His executives were presenting quarterly reports, but something felt off. The numbers looked good on paper, but there was a disconnect between what was being reported and what he sensed was really happening in his company. Employees seemed disengaged during his rare visits to different floors, conversations would halt when he appeared, and there was a palpable tension that he couldn't quite understand. He realized that his position had created an invisible barrier between him and the truth about his own company. That evening, Alexander made a decision that would change his life forever. He would go undercover as an intern, using a false identity to discover what was really happening within Kane Industries. The plan was simple yet elaborate. He would take a leave of absence, claiming he needed time for a personal project, while his trusted assistant Sarah would handle his correspondence and maintain the illusion that he was working remotely. Meanwhile, he would apply for an internship under the name Alex Morgan, a recent college graduate looking to break into the tech industry. The transformation began immediately. Alexander traded his custom-tailored suits for thrift store clothes, his expensive watch for a cheap digital one, and his confident CEO demeanor for the nervous energy of a young professional trying to make his mark. He even went so far as to get a modest apartment in a middle-class neighborhood, complete with second-hand furniture and a beat-up car that was older than some of his actual interns. The attention to detail was meticulous because Alexander knew that one slip-up could expose his identity and ruin everything. Getting hired as an intern in his own company proved easier than expected. The HR department, overwhelmed with applications and focused on filling positions quickly, barely glanced at his fabricated resume. His fake college transcripts and references, carefully crafted with the help of a private investigator he'd hired for corporate espionage in the past, passed scrutiny without issue. Within 2 weeks, Alex Morgan was scheduled to start as an intern in the marketing department of Kane Industries, reporting to a mid-level manager named David Chen who had no idea he was about to supervise his own CEO. The night before his first day, Alexander couldn't sleep. He'd spent years climbing the corporate ladder, fighting tooth and nail to build his empire, and now he was voluntarily stepping back down to the bottom rung. Part of him wondered if this was the most foolish thing he'd ever done, but a larger part was genuinely excited about the prospect of seeing his company through fresh eyes. He had no idea that this decision would lead him to discoveries that would shake the very foundation of everything he thought he knew about business, leadership, and most surprisingly, love. As he set his alarm for 6 a.m., the same time his real interns had to wake up to commute to work, Alexander Kane prepared to become Alex Morgan. Little did he know that in trying to discover the truth about his company, he was about to discover something far more valuable about himself. Alex Morgan's first day at Kane Industries was a baptism by fire that the real Alexander Kane had never experienced. He arrived at 7:30, thinking he was early, only to discover that most of the junior employees had been there since 7, frantically preparing for what they called morning survival. The coffee was bitter, the fluorescent lights were harsh, and the cramped cubicles in the marketing department felt like a different world from his spacious corner office 40 floors above. His supervisor, David Chen, was a harried man in his late 30s who seemed to survive on caffeine and stress. David barely looked up when Alex introduced himself, instead shoving a stack of files across the desk and muttering about deadlines that were impossible but mandatory. The other interns, a mix of recent graduates and career changers, welcomed Alex with the camaraderie of soldiers in the same trench. They shared tips about which printers actually worked, warned him about the broken air conditioning in the East Wing, and explained the unwritten rules that governed their daily survival. But it was during his first team meeting that Alex experienced his first real shock. The project they were working on was a marketing campaign for Kane Industries' new software platform, the same platform that Alexander had been told was performing exceptionally well. However, as he listened to the discussion around the conference table, a different story emerged. The software had serious user interface problems that were causing customer complaints, but these issues were being downplayed in reports that went up the chain of command. Mid-level managers were afraid to deliver bad news to senior executives, who were afraid to disappoint the board, who were afraid to upset the CEO. The revelation hit Alex like a physical blow. His own company was lying to him, not out of malice, but out of fear. The corporate culture he had unknowingly created discouraged honest communication, and rewarded those who told leadership what they wanted to hear rather than what they needed to know. As an intern, Alex was seeing the real consequences of decisions made in boardrooms far removed from their implementation. Employees were working 60-hour weeks trying to fix problems that could have been addressed months earlier if there had been better communication channels. Over the following days, Alex discovered more disturbing truths. The employee satisfaction surveys that crossed his CEO desk showing high morale were misleading because employees were afraid that negative feedback could cost them their jobs. The innovation that Kane Industries was famous for was actually stagnating because middle management was risk-averse, preferring safe, incremental improvements over the bold ideas that had originally built the company. Most shocking of all, many of the company's best employees were actively looking for other jobs, tired of working in an environment where their voices weren't heard and their concerns weren't addressed. The weight of these discoveries was overwhelming. Alexander had spent years believing he was building something great, only to realize that his success had come at the cost of creating a workplace culture that stifled the very creativity and honesty that had made him successful in the first place. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd had to disguise himself as the lowest person on the corporate hierarchy to understand what was really happening at the top. But the most shocking discovery was still to come, and it would arrive in the form of a person who would challenge everything Alexander thought he knew about himself, his company, and what really mattered in life. It was during his second week as an intern that Alex first noticed Emma Rodriguez. She was working late in the adjacent cubicle, her dark hair falling across her face as she concentrated on her computer screen, occasionally pushing her glasses up her nose in a gesture that Alex found inexplicably charming. Unlike the other employees who seemed worn down by the corporate grind, Emma had an energy about her that was immediately captivating. She was passionate about her work, speaking with enthusiasm about user experience design and how technology could genuinely improve people's lives. Emma was a junior UX designer who had been with the company for just over a year, and she represented everything that Alexander had hoped Kane Industries would attract: young, brilliant, idealistic talent that could drive the company forward. But as Alex got to know her better, he realized that her idealism was being slowly crushed by the same systemic problems he'd been discovering throughout the company. She had submitted numerous proposals for improving the user interface of their flagship software, detailed reports that could have solved many of the customer complaints that were being hidden from executive leadership, but her ideas were consistently dismissed by her direct supervisor, who was more concerned with maintaining the status quo than implementing potentially disruptive changes. Their first real conversation happened in the break room on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Alex was struggling with an old coffee machine that seemed designed to frustrate anyone who dared to use it, when Emma appeared beside him with a knowing smile. "The trick is to hit it right here," she said, giving the machine a precise tap that immediately got it working. "This place is full of things that would work better if someone just took the time to understand them properly." There was something in the way she said it that made Alex suspect she wasn't just talking about coffee machines. As they talked, Alex was struck by Emma's intelligence and her genuine care for the company's mission. She spoke about technology not as a means to profit, but as a tool for solving real problems and improving people's lives. Her passion reminded Alexander of his own early days as an entrepreneur, when he'd been driven by vision rather than market share. But Emma also shared her frustrations about working in an environment where good ideas went unheard and where bureaucracy seemed to stifle innovation at every turn. She confided that she'd been considering leaving Kane Industries, despite believing in the company's potential, because she felt like her contributions weren't valued. The more time Alex spent with Emma, the more he found himself drawn to her perspective on both work and life. She approached problems with creativity and empathy, always considering how solutions would affect real people rather than just focusing on metrics and profit margins. During lunch breaks, she would show him designs she'd been working on, explaining her thought process with an enthusiasm that was infectious. Alex found himself looking forward to these conversations more than anything else in his day, and he began to realize that his feelings for Emma were growing beyond professional admiration. But spending time with Emma also deepened Alex's understanding of the problems plaguing his company. Through her eyes, he saw how the disconnect between leadership and workers wasn't just affecting productivity, but was actively driving away the kind of talented, passionate employees that any company would be lucky to have. Emma represented the future of Kane Industries, but the current corporate culture was pushing her toward the exit. Alexander realized that his company's biggest problem wasn't competition or market conditions, but its inability to recognize and nurture the talent that was already within its walls. As Alex walked Emma to her car one evening after another late night at the office, she turned to him with a smile that made his heart skip a beat. "You know, Alex, you're different from most of the guys here. You actually listen when people talk, and you seem to genuinely care about making things better rather than just climbing the ladder." Her words filled him with warmth, but also with a growing sense of guilt about the deception he was perpetrating. He was falling for Emma, but she was falling for Alex Morgan, the struggling intern, not Alexander Kane, the CEO whose decisions had created the very problems she complained about every day. As weeks turned into months, Alex found himself living a double life that was becoming increasingly complicated. By day, he was Alex Morgan, the eager intern who shared Emma's frustrations about corporate bureaucracy and dreamed of making a difference in the tech industry. By night, he was Alexander Kane, the CEO who returned to his penthouse apartment and wrestled with the growing knowledge of how his leadership style had contributed to his company's problems. But the most complex part of his double life was his deepening relationship with Emma, which had evolved from professional admiration to something much more profound. Their connection had grown naturally through shared lunches, late-night conversations in the office, and weekend coffee dates that Emma suggested as friends, but that felt like something more to both of them. Alex discovered that Emma was not only brilliant and passionate about her work, but also incredibly kind, funny, and genuinely interested in making the world a better place. She volunteered at a local coding bootcamp for underprivileged kids on weekends, had rescued 2 cats from a shelter, and could make him laugh until his sides hurt with her impressions of their more pretentious co-workers. The physical attraction was undeniable, but it was Emma's mind and heart that truly captivated Alex. She would challenge his thinking on everything from software design to social responsibility, pushing him to consider perspectives he'd never explored as a CEO surrounded by yes-men. When she talked about her vision for user-centered design, her eyes would light up with the kind of passion that Alexander remembered feeling in his early entrepreneurial days. She made him want to be a better person, not just a more successful businessman. But their growing intimacy was also torture for Alex because every moment they spent together was built on a lie. When Emma complained about the CEO's out-of-touch decisions, Alex had to bite his tongue and nod sympathetically. When she shared her ideas for improving the company, ideas that were brilliant and implementable, Alex knew he could make them happen with a single phone call, but Alex Morgan was powerless to do anything but offer encouragement. Most painfully, when Emma talked about her dreams for the future and mentioned wanting to find someone who shared her values and ambitions, Alex knew she was falling for a person who didn't really exist. The moral crisis came to a head during a company-wide meeting where Alexander Kane was scheduled to address the employees via video conference. Alex sat in the back of the auditorium with Emma and the other junior employees, watching his own face on the big screen as he delivered what he now realized was a tone-deaf speech about company performance and goals. From his position in the crowd, he could see the eye rolls, the skeptical expressions, and the general disengagement of employees who felt disconnected from their leadership. Emma leaned over and whispered, "He seems nice enough, but I bet he has no idea what it's actually like to work in this place." That evening, Emma invited Alex to her apartment for dinner, a simple meal that felt more intimate than any of the 5-star restaurants Alexander had frequented as a CEO. As they sat on her couch afterward, Emma curled up beside him. She opened up about her fears for her future at the company. "Sometimes I feel like I'm shouting into a void," she confessed. "I have so many ideas that could make things better, but there's this wall between people like us and the decision-makers. I wonder if CEO Kane even knows that people like me exist, or if we're just numbers on a spreadsheet to him." Alex's heart broke as he listened to her, knowing that he was the very person she was talking about, and that his actions as CEO had contributed to her feelings of invisibility and frustration. When Emma looked into his eyes and said, "I'm so glad I have you to talk to about this stuff. You get it in a way that most people don't. Alex felt like the worst kind of fraud. She trusted him completely, and he was betraying that trust every single day. The internal conflict was tearing Alex apart. He was falling deeply in love with Emma, but he was also learning that the corporate culture he'd created was slowly crushing her spirit and driving away talented employees like her. He had the power to fix these problems, but doing so would require revealing his true identity and likely losing Emma forever. As he held her in his arms that night, listening to her breathing as she fell asleep against his chest, Alex realized that he was facing the most important decision of his life. Continue the deception and risk losing himself, or tell the truth and risk losing the woman he loved. The moment of truth arrived on a Monday morning that started like any other but would end with everything changed. Alex had been living his double life for nearly 4 months, and the strain was becoming unbearable. He'd made subtle changes to company policy through carefully worded suggestions to his executive team, implemented through his assistant Sarah, but the pace of change was frustratingly slow when he could see so clearly what needed to be done. More importantly, his relationship with Emma had reached a point where continuing the deception felt not just dishonest, but cruel. Emma had confided in him the previous weekend that she'd been offered a position at a competitor, a startup that promised more creative freedom and better communication between management and employees. She was torn because she believed in Kane Industries' mission but felt increasingly frustrated by its execution. "I wish there was a way to make the leadership understand what it's really like down here," she'd said, unconsciously echoing the same sentiment that had driven Alexander to start this experiment in the first place. Maybe if CEO Kane spent just one day working alongside regular employees, he'd see how out of touch his decisions are. That comment gave Alex an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. He would reveal his identity, but not privately to Emma alone. Instead, he would do it in a way that could create the systemic change his company desperately needed while giving Emma the platform she deserved to share her ideas. He spent the weekend crafting a plan that would shock everyone, including himself. Monday morning, Alex sent an email to the entire company from his CEO account, announcing an all-hands meeting for that afternoon. The subject line read, "Important Revelations about Kane Industries' Future." Meanwhile, Alex Morgan showed up to work as usual, but he seemed nervous and distracted to Emma, who noticed everything about him these days. She asked if he was okay, and he told her truthfully that he had something important to share with her after the company meeting. The auditorium was packed with employees from every department, buzzing with speculation about what the CEO might announce. When Alexander Kane walked onto the stage, he looked different somehow, less polished and more human than in his previous appearances. He began by talking about the importance of honest communication and authentic leadership, themes that seemed strangely personal rather than corporate. Then he said something that caused a murmur to ripple through the crowd. "Sometimes, to truly understand your company, you need to see it from the bottom up rather than the top down." Alexander then told the story of the past 4 months, explaining how he'd disguised himself as an intern to discover the truth about his own company. The audience was stunned into silence as he detailed what he'd learned about communication breakdowns, fear-based management, and the disconnect between leadership decisions and their real-world impact. He was brutally honest about his own failures as a leader and his responsibility for creating a culture that stifled innovation and ignored employee input. But the real shock came when Alexander called Alex Morgan to the stage. Emma watched in growing confusion and disbelief as the intern she'd fallen in love with walked up to join the CEO, and then felt her world tilt as Alexander explained that they were the same person. "Alex Morgan taught me more about leadership, empathy, and what really matters than I learned in all my years as CEO," Alexander said, his eyes finding Emma in the crowd. "He also led me to some of the most brilliant, passionate employees this company has ever had. Employees whose voices haven't been heard but whose ideas could transform our future." The revelation sent shockwaves through the company, but Alexander wasn't finished. He announced immediate structural changes designed to address the problems he'd discovered: regular forums for employee input, transparent communication channels between all levels of management, and a new innovation program that would fast-track ideas from junior employees. Most importantly, he announced that Emma Rodriguez would be heading a new user experience division, with the authority to implement the changes she'd been proposing for months. After the meeting, Emma confronted Alex in the parking lot, her emotions cycling between anger, confusion, and hurt. How could you lie to me for months? She demanded, tears streaming down her face. Everything we shared, everything I told you, it was all based on a lie. Alex's heart shattered as he watched the woman he loved struggle with the betrayal, but he also saw something else in her eyes that gave him hope, understanding. You're right, Alexander said, dropping all pretense and speaking as himself for the first time in months. I lied about who I was, but everything I felt for you was real. Every conversation we had, every moment we spent together, that was me, not the CEO persona I'd been hiding behind for years. You changed me, Emma. You showed me what I'd lost in my climb to the top, and you made me want to be worthy of the person you thought I was. Emma stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for the Alex Morgan she'd fallen in love with. Slowly, she began to see him there, underneath the revelation of his true identity. You're still the same person who listened to my ideas and believed in them when no one else would, she said quietly. You're still the man who made me laugh and held me when I cried about my frustrations at work. But you're also the CEO who has the power to actually change things. 6 months later, Kane Industries was a transformed company. The changes Alexander had implemented based on his intern experience had improved both employee satisfaction and company performance. Emma's new UX division had revolutionized their software platform, addressing the customer complaints that had been hidden for months and creating new features that set Kane Industries apart from their competitors. More importantly, the company had developed a culture of open communication and innovation that attracted top talent from across the industry. Alexander and Emma's relationship had required months of rebuilding trust, but it had emerged stronger than before. Emma had come to understand that the man she'd fallen in love with was real, even if his circumstances had been fabricated. Alexander had learned that authentic leadership meant being vulnerable, listening to others, and admitting when you're wrong. Their love story had begun with deception, but it had evolved into something built on truth, respect, and shared vision for the future. As they stood together on the roof terrace of Kane Industries headquarters, looking out over the city where their unusual romance had begun, Emma smiled and said, "You know, I never thought I'd fall in love with a CEO." Alexander laughed and pulled her closer. "I never thought I'd have to become an intern to find myself, but here we are." Their story had proven that sometimes the most unexpected journeys lead to the most extraordinary destinations, and that real love can survive even the most shocking revelations when it's built on a foundation of genuine connection and shared values.